All right, welcome back to a belated but another episode of Phoenix Edge RPG Podcast. My name is Hat,
And I'm Eric.
And I am Stan.
and today, when we're getting back into the groove here, we're going to be covering 3 questions that you all asked on Discord. We have a whole bank of questions, but if you want to ask a question for a later episode, there'll be a Discord link in the description. You can also ask on YouTube comments, but we're really trying to push the Discord some more. But let's go over the questions we're going to answer, and then we're going to quickly talk about basically with the podcast and what's been going on and stuff like that. So for our 3 questions that we have this week, we have one question from, is this Arcity? How do you guys know how he likes to be that pronounced?
Arcity? I don't know.
Sure.
This individual has been on our Discord often, but it's one of those things where you read often. But anyways, the question is basically surrounding modern games and how they tend to have a lot of padding. They have a lot of, random side quests that don't really have much meaning involved with them. And then he's pointing to, older games like Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger, where there seemed to be a shorter length of time playing these games, but they were more meaningful in the content that they had. So we're going to talk about that. And then we're also going to talk about, from Alan on Discord, what is an RPG, what makes an RPG. And then he also brings up here that he's never thought of Link's Awakening or Zelda as an RPG, but then he was baffled that people said not only is that an RPG, so is Assassin's Creed. So we're going to get into that whole debacle. We've covered that before, but this is kind of an interesting new spin on it. So it's been a while too, so it should be pretty fun. And then we're going to wrap things up with, is there any video game you have replayed where you had a complete change of opinion after a second or multiple playthroughs, either for the better or worse? And this is from Perry Dice. So we have those 3 questions we're going to be tackling this episode. And the reason we're going with questions, although we've had a lot of backup of news, is honestly, it's been a few weeks since we had the podcast. I've been working like 7 days a week, sometimes 15 or 16 hours a day. I work in public accounting, so I'm in the auditing section part, and it's just been so crazy lately. So it's been hard for me to find any time at all to be able to do anything, much less a podcast. And so I've just been, I've been canceling a lot. So I apologize. Go ahead.
Oh, no. Finish what you're saying.
I was just going to say, I apologize about that with you guys, looking forward to episodes every week. It is going to be a little slower right now, but we are talking, we are communicating. I am on Discord. We're still on Discord, and we're going to get episodes out as frequently as we can until we can, in the near future, get back to hopefully our, regular schedule. I think that's kind of our goal here, to get back to our weekly format where we're kind of catching up on things. And, I've been playing Bravely Default 2 as much time as I can. And then I also just bought an Apple 4K device. It's going to arrive tomorrow, and I'm going to install Fantasian. That's Sakaguchi's new game. And I'm going to play that when I can as well. So maybe in a future episode, we'll have kind of a catch up where we just talk about some of the games that came out and some of the games we played, in the future, maybe something like that. But if you guys have any ideas, of course, let us know. But Eric, I know you've had some stuff going on too. So you want to touch on that, or what were you going to say?
I don't know. Just one of the main things I was going to say is that the RPG news hasn't really been, there hasn't been anything like, oh my God, we must get on and talk about type of things. There's been a few like snippets here and there, but it has been a pretty dull month in terms of RPG news. So it's kind of been like if there's any good month to pick to, have a lot of overtime at work, it was certainly this one for sure.
Yeah.
But I'm sure if any big topic comes up, we'll respond to it in some way, shape, or form. With it, but
and the goal here is to get back to our normal schedule, and it's not going to take 6 months. It's not going to take anything crazy like that. We're talking, maybe a few weeks. You might have some might take longer than usual with the episodes. And this episode right here, we're just kind of easing back into the swing of things, and before we kind of hit the ground running. So just know that appreciate your patience, and I hope you enjoy the episode. Stan, was there anything you wanted to say? Or
Yeah, I mean, yeah, we're looking to get back into it. It's been busy, I know, for all of us. For Hat especially, though. So, and he's kind of the one who runs most of the things here. So we appreciate him.
We all help where we can, and we all contribute, and it's a collective effort of the podcast that we put out every week, and I think I think most people realize that. Well, let's jump into these questions here. So this first question, this is from, I think the consensus here is Arkati, who says, my question is around pacing and padding in games. Old school JRPGs like Final Fantasy VI, Chrono Trigger were shorter, but had considerably less padding. Side quests tended to be minimal and usually were about the party characters and getting ultimate weapons. Modern games are full of dozens of hours of side quests that sometimes are cool, but often don't enhance anything or add anything. Lots are little more than help random village NPCs find their lost wallet, that type of side quests. So the question here is, do you think, and there's multiple questions, I see what you're doing here, but do you think modern games would benefit from a more Chrono Trigger approach? Why do you think they spend a dev time filling up their games with so many filler quests, though not enough time to make them meaningful? In your opinion, are there modern games that balance this well? So just kind of summarize that, because that was a lot. Retro games, shorter, more meaningful content. More modern games tend to blow things up and be longer, have a lot of padding, or at least it seems to be. And hey, why are they not spending their time focused on making meaningful content as opposed to a lot of this nonsense side quests and kind of filler side quests and just lots of padding and stretching the game out? And what do you guys think about that?
I think it really depends on the game. It's
well, you didn't say, do you have any modern examples of good ones? Go ahead.
If we're going to compare, like, if there's a game that's like only 15, let's say 15 hours long, it's a 15-hour long game. I'm not expecting to see side quests that are like, pick up 5 of these and bring it back to me. I prefer that they just have like I said, a Chrono Trigger like quest list where maybe think more like Mass Effect, where they have like Mass Effect 2 in particular, where you could explore each character's through subquests if you want to. And that was about like a 20-30 hour experience overall doing all their side quests. And like I think when you have like a shorter campaign like that, I think it's better to have more meaningful quests. Right. If you're going to have a game that's going to span like 100 hours, like say like Skyrim or something, I understand you put those filler side quests in to help bring up more world building to the place. Like even if one's not significant, you kind of get the idea of how a place is when you do certain quests in the villages for people, even if they don't feel that grand in scope. But it does help with world building in that particular. But if say like Skyrim wasn't open world and it was just a 15-hour adventure that you go through, I don't want to hassle with those little things. I just want to experience the main story and like have more meaningful side quests with people you meet on the way.
Yeah.
Type of deal. So it really comes down to what type of game that you're looking for out of this.
Yeah, I think that you are right that there is some kind of meaningful world building, even with some quests that don't, like you said, don't seem that grand, or it is just picking up the kid's wallet or whatever it is, the fetch quest. Usually they do provide a little bit of context for something going on with the world. And so I think that games are generally enhanced by those being there. But I think the key word here is when it's optional, right? When it's not optional and they're forcing you to do this stuff, it really starts to become really grating. And the question being applied here is basically, hey, why are the side quests not more meaningful? And this is a question that really has just like blown my mind for a very long time, because when I look at, as an example, lots of people that are listening to this are going to know this company, Square Enix. You look at how many people are talented that work at that company, And then you look at the 7 remake, and I'm looking at the talented people that work there, some of the best in the business of making games. And I look at the side quests, and I'm like looking at Final Fantasy 7 remake, and I'm looking at Midgar, and all the glorious lore, and how big the city is, and all the different elements they can dive into with like having tremendous and fantastic side quests. And then I pick up the game, and I'm finding freaking cats. You know, like
Yeah.
what where are we going wrong? And I'm just like baffled by it. But I just think that maybe it's just not a priority, or it's just easier for them. I think really what it comes down to is it's not a priority, because it just felt like to me with that game and other Square games, a lot of RPGs these days, is it's not really prioritized, or it's kind of left towards the end. And if we have time, we'll kind of do some of that, but they don't really put as much effort into it or prioritize it in a way that I think we would like. And that's honestly because people buy it. But I think this is, if you look at Final Fantasy 15, for example, they were having those surveys come out where
Mhm.
they're having people vote on what they wanted as future DLC. And players responded in the survey, and everyone picked story-based stuff. And all the stuff at the bottom was like some of these gameplay tweaks. And I like gameplay tweaks and stuff, but most people wanted like very meaningful new content. And Square implemented like the top 2 story ideas, and then they implemented all like the bottom gameplay
Yeah.
stuff that nobody voted for. And it's like, why did they do that? Well, it's a lot easier to be honest, to put in, some of these new monsters or something like that, as opposed to trying to create this whole sequence of events that's really, going to leave a lasting emotional impact. And I mean, these are programmers that are making these things, right? So programmers are going to design stuff that they find interesting. And, that doesn't mean they're necessarily going to have an aptitude for storytelling. I know programmers that are hobby game makers, and they'll talk my ear off about how they created a game where NPCs automatically generate, and like they'll have randomized appearances, and they'll spend, and they're fascinated by it, and how it has like automated quests, so you'll never have the same quest again in the future. And it's like they're like feeling like they're really making this organic and lifelike world. And to me, it's just like that lacks a soul.
Yeah.
And it's just, but these are the people that are really talented, and a lot of these people end up making these side quests, and they're going to make what they think is interesting, I think. So I think it's a combination of all those things that I brought up. But Stan, what do you think?
Yeah, I'm thinking mostly the same thing. Like they're even though there are side quests sprinkled throughout the game when you play the game from point A to point B, most likely they are thrown in towards the end of development in order to extend the playtime of the game, because that's like a selling point of these games. Like people want well, us old, JRPG fogies don't necessarily want 80-hour games, but there's a lot of people who enjoy like just getting being able to put a ton of time into these RPGs. And that's why they put them in there, is because the length of the game is a selling point to a lot of people, even if that means like uh, a game I like, for instance, Xenoblade Chronicles, just chock full of fetch quests. Maybe 10% of those quests are meaningful, and that might be that might be being generous, you know. But like the question asking about Chrono Trigger, I think Chrono Trigger really benefited for 2 things. Number one, it put all the side quest content pretty much at the very end. There were still little things you could do like during the game, like little areas you could explore, and things like that. But all the main side quests that involved like going to an optional dungeon or something, those were all at the very end of the game. So if you cared enough, you could do it. But if not, you could just go try and finish the game. And
Right.
so for the people who just want to play through the story, play through the game, like you said, it's optional. It's completely optional, and so they don't have to pick and choose. Like versus a game I'm playing right now, which is a good game, Bravely Default 2, has a lot of side quests just like popping up after every major story event. Like, here's a handful of like 3 or 4 new side quests. You want to do them? And one of them will be like you'll get a scene between 2 characters, and they have some dialogue, and it kind of enhances the story, enhances the characters a little bit, like not a ton, but a little bit. But then the other ones will be, go collect 3 seashells for me, and the quest will literally just walk outside of town, go find the 3 seashells on the world map, come back, and then you come back and he's like, thanks, here's your high potion or whatever, and you're just like, this is a waste of time,
Right.
So
right.
yeah, I think they are mostly put in there just to extend the length of the game, and we would be better off, I think, if they took more games took the Chrono Trigger approach, and if you had to have 20 extra hours of side quest content, but a lot of it is not engaging or is not enhancing the story or the characters in some way, then yes, like put it all at the end, and then the people who really care about it, right, will find it and do it as endgame content, rather than like kind of tossing it at the player like throughout the whole game. Because that, like Xenoblade Chronicles or Bravely Default 2, that can just, players want to complete those quests, because if you come back to complete them later, well, the items they give you, for the chapter 2 quests when you're at the end of the game are useless. So players
Yeah.
feel like, oh, I have to complete it now or never, and then it becomes now, right? And then the length of people's playtime gets really dragged out, and it can hurt the pacing of the game, I think.
Yeah,
So,
I agree with you. Real quick, can you go in the settings and make sure your mic is selected? I just, it sounds to me like you sound good and you sound clear. It might be the new room. I don't know. But anyways, I think you're right with bringing up Xenoblade Chronicles, because that game was a stellar game that would probably be benefited by being a little bit shorter, not having so much of that padding, having so many of those frivolous side quests. But I do think that if they stuck all that crap at the end, it is important to, I think you would lose something, because there's a certain amount of engagement you get with the world by having that stuff, throughout the journey, because that's your way of interacting with the world. I mean, if you didn't have that at all until the very end, I think you would lose something. But I think obviously we all want that content to be there to be good.
Yeah.
Right. Oh, you sound way better. Yeah.
Okay.
No. Yeah. But that's just it. It has to be good. But I think that developers themselves are so focused these days on trying to like keep gamers in their ecosystem for as long as possible.
Yeah.
And so, you have things like with the 7 remake, they're having conversations of how do we keep people engaged until the next game comes out? To me, what are you talking about? I bought the game, I played it, and then when the next one comes out, I'll buy that one too. You don't have to keep me engaged, but they're coming out with these cell phone games. They're doing all these different things to try to keep you engaged. And some games, like, will just keep, updating with, like, Final Fantasy 15 had all that extra, go to Bob's Diner and we'll have new monster hunts every month. We're going to come out with new DLC every month, but they're trying to keep you in the loop so that when that new content comes out, you're going to be more engaged to buy it. And I'm sure there's some kind of spreadsheet somewhere that explains that if they do that, a certain amount of more people return. I'm sure it's profitable, but I from an artistic standpoint, I don't think that's the best way to execute your vision. I don't think that makes a good or satisfying game.
Yeah, I agree. And I have a sneaking suspicion that some this is a little bit off topic, but some developers or publishers use the like the trophies and the achievements to kind of accomplish the same thing. You'll be making progress, and if you want that platinum trophy, there will be like 3 bronze trophies you have to get in order to get the platinum, because that means you got everything. But there will be like 3 bronze that will require like a ridiculous like 200 hours of grinding, or like having to look up a guide to like find the 80 like random items scattered throughout the open world that you have to find. And then players feel like more engaged with the game if they get that platinum trophy, because it's like, oh yeah, I platinumed that game. I'm gonna get the DLC and I'm gonna platinum that too, or whatever, you know.
You know, I don't
So
have one single platinum trophy on my Sony account.
yeah,
And it's because I hate what they've made achievements into. They're just such artificial ways to keep you engaged with the game instead of actually making
I agree. Yeah,
content that engages you.
yeah,
And I'm not going to make a game not fun for me for the sake of getting a platinum trophy. Because, like you said, they add some stupid thing in there that's like kill 200 of these things that
yeah,
takes hours to do just to get one bronze trophy towards like a platinum trophy that requires just ridiculous things that you have to go outside of the game's ecosystem
yeah.
to accomplish. And I'm like, no, no thanks.
I
Now,
I was just
if
gonna
it
say,
was Zelda,
oh,
thankfully, Nintendo doesn't do a trophy system. Any achievement systems they have are in the game.
yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
the last game I platinumed was Final Fantasy X, the remaster, when it came out. And that involves like having to fill out the entire sphere grid for every character, which I had never done before. And I thought, well, that's like the end game
No.
content. I want to at least do it once. And I did it and never again. And that's the last platinum I've ever gotten, because I at some point when I was doing it, I was maybe like 90% complete with the sphere grid. And I thought, in the time it takes to do this, I could have finished 2 other games, like 2 other really good games. Like, why is this worth it? You know, and
That-
so I just lost all
yeah.
motivation for trophies in general after that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't have time for trophies. I don't care about trophies. I saw that there a survey recently where people were talking about features they would want in a Switch Pro if a Switch Pro came out. And
Mhm.
one of the most highest voted things on this survey was trophy support for games. I don't
Yeah,
care,
they got us.
and I'm not doing it, you know? And I'm just going to play what I want to play and play as much as I want to play and play what I find meaningful. And that's going to be it. And
Yeah.
it doesn't eat at me 2 months later, like, oh, I didn't collect all the forks in this game. You know, if I don't care. I'm not doing it because it took them like 10 seconds to make that. And it's going to take me 45 hours to complete. I'm not going to do it.
Yeah.
But the question here also points out, and I don't want to derail if you guys have another point, but it brings up also, in your opinion, are there modern games that balance this well? And I got to be honest, we bring it up a lot here, but Witcher 3 does a great job of this. I mean, and it's a very
Mhm.
long game. I mean, if you want to complete the main game and you want to complete all the DLC, I mean, you're talking like 150 hours at least. But almost all the content is pretty meaningful, and it shows that it can be done. And there's a lot of side quests, and what they do is they kind of they prioritize the side quests from the ground up. And I think that's the key factor here, is when it's prioritized and they
Mhm.
built the entire game around that, it really shines. And so what they did is they created a premise where they took a premise that would suit a side quest open world format where you're searching for someone. You're this expert in killing monsters. People hire you to kill monsters because that's your profession. They have a name for it. There's an entire lore, there's an entire history behind a Witcher, right? And so it allows them to naturally build the world and tell you something that would enhance the story through you doing mundane quests like killing monsters, because in the grand scheme of things, you're also uncovering oils and enhancing your sword and doing things that only a witcher would know how to do. And then on top of that, like the the actual story driven, like not world building moments, they just hit, man. When they try, they just hit really hard. And I think it just goes back to, like I said, like when they prioritize it, I think that, it really shows. But was there any other games you guys can think of, like modern games or semi-modern games where, they kind of have a good good grasp of this concept?
Actually, I know we just brought it up before, but I actually thought Bravely Default 2 did a pretty good job of
Man,
side quests.
going out and
Because
getting
here's
those
the thing.
seashells.
Well, here's the thing.
Okay.
there are
I'm
those
ready for
side
it.
quests that are like go get seashells, but
Yeah.
there's
Yeah.
no story to them. They're like just small ways to build up getting some items and gear
Right.
for that. And then at the same time though, they have these side quests also that world build on certain characters in the
Mm.
towns. And like you're fully interacting with them, fully voiced cutscenes. Um you do learn a lot more about the towns from these side quests before you leave. And I think those are pretty meaningful. And they're not like littered out either. It's like two, maybe three at most. And they're all of them are meaningful. And then like there's a one, not the main snow village, but like the one you go to before that. Like you go there and there's a secret side quest to get the salve maker job that
Yes.
you had
Yeah.
to deal with the twin brothers, and just discovering that and getting a whole new job out of it was pretty
Hmm.
awesome. So like there are those like meaningful side quests in there that are really nice. What and now if I made a modern game, like a modern RPG, I think actually what I would do is I would actually make side quests sparse in that like there's a few around, but each one has meaning. But to make up for those filler ones, like those like go fetch 4 shells, I would actually put like a bulletin board. I think Star Ocean may have done something similar to this. You put a bulletin board like in the village, and then you can have a list of collect these things here, and you get like rewards for it. So instead of like trying to make it feel mm, like be meaningless fetch quests, have it be a way, an alternate way to grind your characters if you're looking for more gold or exp. Like if you bring me back this monster's hide, 3 of them will give you bonus exp and gold for getting those and bringing them back.
Would this be in a diner?
It could be like at a bar. It could be
I'm just giving
outside
you a
of a
hard
town
time. Yeah.
square. It
No,
can
it's a.
be
I know where
uh
you're going. It's yeah.
it can be up your bottom. It
Yeah.
Yeah.
can be anywhere.
I don't know.
Yeah. I kind of, I think a lot of times what happens, and I think the approach you brought up, Eric, is a good one. But I think a lot of times where developers get stuck is they're trying to give players, to them, the side quest's primary purpose is to give players, like you brought up, Eric, a purpose to make more gold if they need it, or more experience points, or to get certain items. Maybe there's a crafting system and they need a method for you to be able to get more materials. And so it's an ends to you getting more crap. And if it happens to be meaningful in some way, whether that's, I guess, getting a new job, which would be getting more stuff, or story driven or whatever, then that's a plus too. But the primary cause here is, hey, let's come up with a way so players don't get stuck. So if they spend all their money buying 99 potions and now they can't buy, this new magic that they need, they need a way to correct for that mistake. And honestly, I think that just comes down to how they develop the game. I think that I think that sometimes it would be better if they just had less fights, less boss battles, and just more focused on specific instances of, combat with where they accurately prepare you for that fight, I guess I would say.
Yeah.
And stop trying to create these algorithms that try to emulate real life but end up feeling like you're just making me do the same crap over and over again in order to make it seem like there's thousands of hours of content, because that stuff feels old 10 years ago. So,
Yeah, I'm more tolerant of it if the more menial stuff has some kind of meaning to it or like some purpose to it. But if
right.
like if you could tell clear as day that the developers just want to pad out the time as much as possible, 15. Um, sorry, excuse me. Then like if it kind of comes off as like cheap, shallow,
Yeah.
lazy. I think if you want to bring those in, try to find some clever way of bringing them in instead of just being like, oh well, they paid $60 for a game. We have to make this RPG like 100 hours somehow.
Yeah. I think Hat is right with the Witcher 3 example in that that's the gold standard now. And why? Like for side quests. And why? Because they planned for it from the beginning, right? With like these very well written scenarios with fully voice acted and everything, as if they're like their own little mini chapters of the game. And I haven't played Witcher 3, still need to get on that, but the most recent modern game that I can think of that did it pretty well, although I don't know if it was great, was Horizon Zero Dawn. It still had quests in there that were like, go kill 4 of these monsters, bring them back to me or whatever. But then there were some others that were like, you met like these NPC characters and they weren't just there to like, go get this for me. They had like an arc. Like one in particular I can remember just quick was there was like a girl who ran away from home to because she was in love with this like warrior from the opposing tribe. And so you had to kind of go find her, and they were like meeting on an island like a distance away from the village, so they could meet and be together essentially, and then it goes on from there. But that like tied into the fact that during the main story, like it was a very big plot point that these 2 tribes, the Karja and the Shadow Karja, are like at war, or like and it's kind of calm right now, but the relationships are bad, and so then you do this like smaller little quest to see how that's like affecting everyday people, so it was like meaningful in that regard, and even though the tasks might have been very mundane, it was like go to the island, kill like the monster that ambushes them or whatever, then go to this like other shore and find out what happened to the guy who didn't show up to their island or something. Like it's the actual tasks are not that special, like you've done them a bunch of times, but they put them in the context of like this small story which related to the larger story. And so that's like much better side quest design, but it takes a lot more work. Like Hat said, like you have to plan for that kind of thing from the beginning, because you have to have the voice acting, perhaps the motion capture of the characters if necessary, which is stuff you have to do like way before you actually program, the stuff. So
yeah, I think you're right though, but I would slightly diverge from that and just say the underworkings of a lot of these great side quests, it's all the same as the very mundane quests. It's technically the same. You're doing the same crap. When in Witcher 3, when you have to go to a field and kill a monster, you can change that with a game that came out 15 years ago. It's the same thing. It's all in the dressing. Why are you going to kill? Why are you going to kill the monster? Why should I kill this monster? What would happen if I do? What would happen if I don't? And it's how they dress that up is what makes it meaningful, I think. And the example you brought in Horizon Zero Dawn does that well. And honestly, I think modern games are doing better than it used to be, even on the Super Nintendo days. I think they just had enough sense, or maybe it was limitations in the cartridge size, where the game would just end. And there's less opportunity to just have dumb stuff. But it took a while once they had unlimited room almost to kind of figure it out. But I think developers are starting to recognize that, okay, if you're going to have some of this stuff, it works better if it can work in the benefit of the game. And that's what I brought up at the beginning of this question was I could not believe, with all the potential that we had with 7 Remake and Midgar, that I was finding cats. I'm thinking of all the different sectors in the city and all the different mob bosses they could have had, and like how like the entire economy and the culture there, and there's these other like Wutais there, like there's all these different things you could do, and we were finding cats. And I understand that there was a nice payoff at the end with talking to Tifa, but I could have not found cats and had that, so it's all in the dressing. But anyways,
I agree.
You guys want to say anything else on this before we move on? I think we've been hitting this for about 30 minutes, I'm seeing.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Okay.
I think we covered it.
Cool.
Yeah, pretty much.
Good question, though. Good question.
Mhm.
So, okay. So, our next question here is from Alan, who says, have you guys ever discussed what makes an RPG video game an RPG in terms of genre? Yes, we have. The other day, I mentioned on a different Discord that Link's Awakening isn't an RPG video game, and apparently people disagree. I was kind of baffled because I was certain people have moved on from thinking Zelda is an RPG to calling it an action adventure game. Not only that, but the argument that any game with character progression is clearly an RPG came up. I would say plenty of games have RPG gameplay elements, but they shouldn't be categorized as RPGs. So I mentioned, would you call Assassin's Creed an RPG in terms of genre? Some kid stepped in and basically said, of course, Assassin's Creed is an RPG. So is Zelda. And then this was the end of the question. Like, he was just baffled. So let me just comment on this here. I'll start this off. I would say from like a very technical standpoint, obviously, if you want to go back to like the 80s or perhaps even earlier, RPGs at their foundation, they require a dice roll and stats, right? For a stat-based system. That's the basic foundation of an RPG. So this is the crux of this argument when people get into is it an RPG or not, is people will say, does it have a dice roll system? And I think that as we've gone over time, as games have developed, as we've come up with new RPGs and like we've progressed, I think that we've come up with like additional things that people have begun to associate with RPGs where you actually start to expect it. I mean, you expect a lot of times to have swords, you expect magic, you expect equipment and crafting and going to the shop and upgrading and doing those types of things. And I think you're starting to have a lot of games that have all those things that we expect RPGs to have that have come over decades of just developing the genre, but they almost go out of their way not to have a dice roll system. So I'm looking at, Horizon Zero Dawn, Ghost of Tsushima. Those games have down the list everything you would want in an RPG with equipment crafting, and just exploration and fantasy. But then it gets to like the final component, the foundation of what makes an RPG, and it's missing that dice roll system. And so it's kind of like one of those weird things where I think technically I would never say to Eric and Stan that Breath of the Wild is an RPG, but categories really serve a purpose for who's asking and why. And if someone's wanting to know if they would enjoy something, if they ask me if Breath of the Wild's an RPG and I know what they mean is, can I run around to cities and buy equipment and explore stuff and attack with a sword? I'm going to say, yeah, because that's what they mean, and I'm not going to sit there and try to tell them what a dice roll system is and how like back in the 80s, you could upgrade different, your charisma and stuff like that. I feel like it's moved on from that. So I can kind of see where both sides are coming from, but what do you guys think?
Well, in the terms of Zelda, Zelda will be to me as an RPG only if I can use it as a means to talk about it on this channel. I will call it an RPG then, for the sake of me being able to allowed to talk about Zelda. But
Scientifically
really,
speaking,
the biggest two things. One, it's no one can truly define what an RPG is. If you bring 10 people, line them up, and ask each one of them, what do you think makes an RPG? Each of them are going to have likely very different answers. Like some people are going to be like, oh, it has to have a real good story. It's like, oh, it's got to have turn-based numbers and leveling systems.
yeah.
As one developer said, it needs a world map. Like there's so many factors that have gone into RPGs as a genre over the years, and it's gotten to the point where we're putting action into what were once traditional role playing games. So now we got this like big like confusion of what makes an RPG, what doesn't make an RPG. So like I said, there's no clear definition of it. If you think that it's a like Assassin's Creed is an RPG, okay. I mean, that's your opinion. It's definitely an action adventure game to me. But I mean, if that's what you think, there's no consequence for thinking otherwise. Like, do do people just want to see like the genre RPG labeled on Zelda? Like,
Well,
does it really matter if it's called that or not at the
I
end of the day?
yeah, I mean, I think what you're getting at here is things change over time, and it means different things to different people. I mean, to my dad, when he was a kid, like he was a teenager, Led Zeppelin was a heavy metal band. But
Right.
in 2021, Led Zeppelin is not a heavy metal band, right?
Classic rock band. Yeah.
It's a classic. It's not. It's people
Back
would
then, Elvis was the work of the devil.
yeah, or like in like the early '80s, like people considered AC/DC with Back in Black like a heavy metal band, and today AC/DC is just a rock band or a hard rock band. So things change as the genre progresses, and it's going to mean different things to different people. And if you grew up playing Dungeons and Dragons and like board games, and you're very into that realm, and then they started adapting that to video games, and you kind of moved with the genre from there, you're going to look at something like Breath of the Wild and think, well, that's not a freaking RPG. That's not, I don't get the, like, there's no class system. I don't get to upgrade my stats. But then someone else who grew up with that might think, what are you talking about? Like, what's the difference of flow of gameplay from Final Fantasy VII and Breath of the Wild? Final Fantasy VII, how to get to the next marker is to get to the next city. And what do you do when you get to the city? You go out and you buy equipment. Well, what do you do in Horizon Zero Dawn, Ghost of Tsushima, and Breath of the Wild? You get to the next camp, you buy equipment, and then you you talk to people and maybe do some side quests. It's a very similar format. With Breath of the Wild, when you get to upgrade, what are you upgrading? You're upgrading hearts, you're upgrading your climbing ability, or you're upgrading, your gliding ability. It's all duration or how long you can withstand attacks, which is very similar to upgrading your stats. It's going to mean different things to different people. And I guess to me, like, this, is it an RPG debate really just comes down to what is the reason why you're asking and what is the purpose, because otherwise it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like a genre, like you mentioned, is meant to classify something for people who are asking about it. Like the Led Zeppelin, the AC/DC was a great example, because back when those bands came out, like their style of music, that was considered heavy metal, right? Because there wasn't
heavy
much,
as hell. Heavy as
yeah,
crap.
there wasn't much heavier than that. So then that was heavy metal, and then the spectrum shifted, right?
Mhm.
And they remained where they were, but then other bands went further that down that path of heavy metal. So I there is a really good video by Super Derek, the Super Derek RPG channel, where he got asked this question years ago, and his answer I think still holds up pretty good today. He was talking about, there isn't really like a checklist, like if you have this you're an RPG, if you don't have it you're not, kind of thing, but more it's so like you have to think about it as a spectrum, and things are more or less RPG like, right, depending on where they land. So he actually thought that the most RPG like thing you can do is actually not really like a video game like we would think, but actually LARPing, like live action role playing, right? Because you're actually like role playing a character in real life, like dressing in costume, and like going to a Renaissance fair. Like if you go to a Renaissance fair, the people there that are like all in costume, their goal is to try and like speak to you as if you were someone who existed in that era and was coming to the fair, and they're trying to play the role of this character, right? So then
that's not many people get into that, but that's like the truest form of role playing in his opinion. Then you go slightly over and you have Dungeons and Dragons, right, which is the traditional tabletop role playing, which require dice rolls, but then you're still role playing a character. You're becoming a different character. You're choosing a class that has stats and abilities, and you're playing through a campaign like that. Then you go over a little bit further and you have Western RPGs, mostly things like Skyrim, Fallout, even, where it's still the same thing. The character in the game is you, and you're choosing a class and like abilities and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And then as you go further to the right, you get JRPGs, which are now you're not choosing a character anymore. In many cases, you're taking on the role of a pre-existing character. So it's lost some of that role-playing element. You don't have as much freedom of choice. It's more like you're stepping into the shoes of a different character and kind of exploring the world through their life or their views. So you can find
how far do we have to go till we get to Call of Duty
Zelda.
having leveling up?
Well, yeah, that's the thing. Like they're like way over on the end. Like maybe barely you can consider them RPGs, but I would say in terms of gameplay,
it tends to be RPG elements. Yeah.
Yeah, I would say in terms of
hilarious at the Game Awards if they went, and the best RPG of the year goes to The Last of Us 2.
Yeah. Yeah, it's at a certain point, you're right, though. It gets to a point like, well, I can play Madden football, right? And pick Tom Brady, right? And say I'm role playing Tom Brady as the quarterback of the Patriots, and he has stats. Like he has stats, and from season to season he levels up.
So yeah, let's choose that then. Okay, let's say you have that where you're role playing this person, right? And they have stats, and you can like mess with the stats, and you can upgrade the stats, which is very similar to Dungeons and Dragons. But then, is that more of an RPG than Ghost of Tsushima?
I would say no in that case, because
but that has all the core foundation, and the reason Ghost of Tsushima is not an RPG is because it doesn't have that crap.
Yeah, so it's like
let me add to both your points. Okay, so I'll ask you both.
Okay.
All right. Do you think Final Fantasy VII Remake is an RPG?
Yes, I think so. Although I think it
yes
is...
or no? Just yes or no.
Yes.
Do you think Final Fantasy VII Remake's an RPG?
Yes.
No.
No.
He said yes or no. Do you want me to elaborate or?
We'll elaborate on that later.
Okay.
I should have been here for that previous episode. Like, do you think Final Fantasy 15 is an RPG?
No.
Yes.
Okay. Do you think Witcher 3 is an RPG?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So what was the difference between FF15 and Witcher 3?
Well, Witcher 3 allows you to customize your character with stats, and you're able to
you can do that in
player
15.
choices. 15 is very... I consider Final Fantasy 15 almost very similar to the same gameplay loop as Horizon Zero Dawn. And so to me, if you're not going to consider Horizon Zero Dawn an RPG, I find it weird that you would consider Final Fantasy 15 an RPG. The only difference is Noctis levels up, but I mean, obviously there's story and world building differences, but Noctis levels up, but it's meaningless. It doesn't matter. It's just there to call it an RPG.
All right, so you don't have to agree with me for me to make this point.
But go ahead.
But for argument's sake, we're going to talk about like what you find in an RPG is it's first off, it's completely subjective. Two, like if you're asking yourself, is this an RPG? Does the game check off many elements that you personally find in the art that you look for when you want to play RPGs? And if it does, then at least you can tell yourself at least it has elements of role-playing games I like in it, or something of the matter. I don't know. It's just
no, I feel you. I feel what you're saying here is that if it has the things that are important to you that you enjoy in an RPG, and then another game has those elements, then yeah, why not? You know, and the thing is, I loved playing Ghost of Tsushima. It was a great game. And the parts of my brain that enjoyed it are the same exact parts of my brain
Mm,
that enjoyed Witcher 3, but
yeah.
it's not an RPG, you know? But it's entertaining the same part of my brain because it's having me do almost identical stuff without the leveling up mechanic. And so
Mm,
I you know, and real quick, just so people aren't losing their mind with the keyboard warriors out there, we're on RPG podcast. If you look at our channel, there's lots of Final Fantasy 7 remake. There's lots of Final Fantasy 15. So we talk about that because it's yes, it's an RPG. It's just to me, those games are like actively trying to go a different route, but they're just putting a level up mechanic in there so that it can still be an RPG. Whereas when I look at games like Witcher 3, where your progression matters more.
mm.
Whereas in those games, like it doesn't matter as much, I guess is what I'm getting at. Whereas like Final
Well,
Fantasy 12, your class matters, right? How you develop your character matters. How you develop your, you know, with what equipment you can buy and things like that. All that matters. And to me, that's more of an RPG than a little level up mechanic in the
well, when it
So,
background.
comes to mainline Final Fantasies, they're literally marked RPGs. Like, how much more is coming straight out of the developer's mouth?
Yeah, that's
Like,
why
like this is the RPG you want.
it's RPG light, I guess is what I'm saying.
yeah, yeah. Well, for me, like when it comes to gameplay, the way I, in my mind, think of something as an RPG or not is what is the primary thing you need in order to progress or like be successful at this game? Do you need stats and equipment, or do you need to get good, right, at something, at like some kind of task? You know, so
Well, you could
and
get good
and
at
that's
stat management, right?
well, yeah, but I mean like
You mean like
my
flexi
football example, right?
okay.
What's more important? Having the quarterback with like the best stats or like knowing how to be good at a football simulation game, like being able to pass to the
Right,
open man, you know?
right,
Like
right. Well,
you'll be way
like
way more successful.
cutting out the extreme example someone might bring up of if you hack the game and give all your characters max stats, then that might
Well,
be
yeah.
able to override
Right,
you knowing
right.
how to play football. But
Yeah, yeah.
generally speaking,
But
yeah, I see what you're saying.
but in an RPG, if somebody has like a more powerful character, they're generally going to win versus in like a game with RPG elements, the person who's good at the game will generally beat the player who just has like better stats, right? So a good example I think is Monster Hunter.
Which one?
All the people who are like or the newest one or even Monster Hunter World, the
Okay.
people who are the best at the game are the people who got really good at like they know the monsters attack patterns. They're just like really skilled at the game. But it's also an RPG in that those players, unless they have the best equipment, like there's certain monsters that they could maybe beat them, but they'll be fighting them for hours, right? Just because their attacks do no damage. So that's where that becomes like an action RPG because the two things you need are kind of equal measure, right? You need action skills at the game to actually be good at the game, but you also need to engage with the RPG mechanics in order to be successful as well. And that's why I would say um, Zelda, which bringing it back to the beginning of the conversation, is if it's an RPG, it's very RPG light because it's really the action and puzzle elements that make you successful at the game or not, right? Like I can't grind to get past like a puzzle. You know, I can't have Link just like kill like I can't be
You
stuck at a
can
puzzle, walk away and go kill 100 enemies, come back and just have it automatically be solved. You know, I have to engage with the game's like puzzle mechanics, the exploration mechanics, like those are more important for progressing at the game than like how many heart containers you have.
You
I
know,
You
do you
think
know,
know what game we haven't brought
that's
up
the way I
yet?
see it.
We haven't brought up Kingdom Hearts. That's like the defining example of having role playing elements in a game that's mostly action.
I mean, you still have your
Mhm.
party-based combat. I mean, you still kind of like upgrade stuff, right?
Right, but it's still mostly action and
Yeah.
reacting at the end of the day.
Hmm.
So, but a lot of the RPG side of it is like in the menus
Yeah.
and like, putting in what you want Sora to do or you want Donald and Goofy to do, uh, what combo setups you want to do, all that kind of stuff. That's all the role playing side of it.
Well,
Like,
I
Yes.
would, I would, yeah, I would argue with yes, with RPGs, if you level up your character, if you grind or whatever, you're going to overcome obstacles by upgrading your stats. And
Mhm.
if you're playing something not that doesn't let you do that, then obviously you're not going to be able to do that. You're going to have to rely completely on, your ability to learn patterns or whatever the case may be. But I think the reason that is there is because it's instilling an idea of experimentation, that you're going to be able to develop a character a particular way and see what happens, and that there's going to be different outcomes. There's different ways to take down enemies. You don't do you don't learn one pattern and then ideally anyways and do the same thing. There's going to be different strategies. It's almost like chess. There's different ways to attack everything, and it's
Yeah.
going to be different, whereas with a God of War game or something, there's going to be a singular method to killing, the enemy. Oh, when he turns around and he looks at the sky, you know that he's momentarily weak and you can attack him. There's no like switching your class and trying it with a different class. There's no trying with a different equipment setup. There's no changing your attack pattern based upon your class. Like, oh, okay, now I'm a tank, so I'm just going to go in there and take all the hits. There's none of that. It's just completely
Get good. Right.
well, yeah, learn one or two methods and then like get really good at
Yeah.
that, with
Mhm.
that particular thing. And so when we talk about, Breath of the Wild, I'm like, well, you can I guess you still have to do certain things to upgrade your stats, but I mean, you can upgrade your hearts, right? Your health. You can
Yeah.
get a ton of health and get through obstacles that way. Um so it's I don't know.
Yeah,
I think
that's
this. Go ahead.
well, that's why I think like if I'm thinking of my RPG spectrum again, right? Like Final Fantasy 4 is like an RPG for sure, even though it doesn't have a lot of customization because the only thing you can do is basically increase your stats and try to execute good strategy in the turn-based battles,
But you don't
It's
have to use a specific class to take down a monster. You can do different, and depending on which characters you have in your party, is
yeah.
going to create a different attack pattern.
Yeah, so it's strategy and
Like
stats.
if you have
Those are
all
like
mages, you're gonna do different things than if you're gonna have, you know,
right.
a party of, you know, knights, right?
Right. But then something that I think is also an excellent game, but I would consider like further away from the true role-playing game would be something like Horizon Zero Dawn because in Horizon stats are important, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you can only challenge such um so many strong monsters if you don't have the stats, right? Because you'll just be shooting arrow after arrow into them and you won't be doing enough damage really if you don't have good stats and equipment.
Mm-hmm.
But you can overcome bad stats or like lower stats with good aim, right? Or good reflex skills of like knowing the
Sure.
attack patterns of the enemies and trying to dodge. So it's really like if you think about Dungeons and Dragons, like well, it's all stats and dice rolls. There isn't a lot of skill, like gamey skill, I guess you could say, in it.
Mechanical
It's
skill, yeah.
yeah, it mostly comes down to planning, time investment, which is like how you increase your stats and some luck. Whereas on the other side, it's like stats are important, but you can overcome them with like skill, like some kind of skill. And if you get all the way over to the other point, like we were talking about, like Call of Duty or something, well, Call of Duty has like level ups in the multiplayer or whatever, but like skill will overcome those every time. It's like so skewed towards skill that you can have a player of lesser skill will always lose to like these professional players, and they can like even pick like the most basic weapons, right? And probably take them out with ease.
Yeah, totally. I agree with you. I just think that if you think about it, though, I mean, there's people who do no sphere grid runs with Final Fantasy X that are not upgrading stats at all, and it's because they got good, right?
That's true. There are some exceptions.
I guess to me, like when you're talking about, Aloy, like the fact that you came up with what accessories you put on your armor and how you upgraded that and how you manipulated how you blend in with your environment. To me, that's you manipulating your stats, because under the hood of the game, there's a variable that says stealth, and it's 10. And then when you put this accessory on, it goes up to 15. The fact that they're not showing you that, it still exists. And is that a result of the fact that you just got good, or is it? I don't know. Yeah. I guess
I would consider it an RPG for that reason. Yeah, because it has stats that you can adjust and increase to take on harder challenges, for sure.
Yeah.
There's people who don't consider Horizon an RPG.
I think it just circles back to what I originally said. Everyone has their own definition of what makes an RPG, and if you think Zelda, Horizon, Assassin's Creed's an RPG, if it helps justify the product in your head, go for it.
It's a very messy genre definition, for sure.
Like, I may not agree with you if something is an RPG or not, but like, it's such a subjective thing today, and the RPG element has been explored in so many different ways that it's just hard to say like what are the defining traits of an RPG. Like, what must be on the checklist to have the RPG in the back of on the back cover with listed genres with it.
Right. It's almost like we need new genres, because they came up with these genres when games were very limited, and like there's very clear lines. You had side scrollers, you had racing games, you had Dungeons and Dragons games, and like there wasn't a lot of ability to overlap. And then over time, it's just like now they can kind of do whatever they want. They're like, no, we're just going to borrow everything.
We kind of do it already unofficially. Like,
because
we'll call it something like action RPG.
Yeah. Turn-based strategy RPG, or a tactical RPG, right? For like Fire Emblem or Final Fantasy Tactics, to kind of differentiate them.
Mobile RPG.
Yeah.
If it says mobile in it, run away, folks.
So Stan, can you have an action adventure game with free to play mechanics in it?
That's what Genshin Impact is, right? Basically.
Well, it's an RPG.
No, actually,
it's got stats.
That's an RPG.
Stuff,
Stats are very important. Yeah.
If you're paying to win, then you're not getting good, right? You're just upgrading your character.
That's true. I didn't think about that. So we need a new category: pay to win RPG. Right.
It's called lost time and waste of time genre. But anyways, we cover this question every now and again. It comes up in a new way, and it's always a fun talk, because we don't ever come to like a real conclusion other than you know it when you see it. And if you like it and you want it to be called an RPG, that's okay. I don't know if I'd ever call Assassin's Creed an RPG. Maybe the newer Assassin's Creed.
Yeah,
I could see that. Ones, I could actually see that, to be honest.
I haven't
played Valhalla, but go ahead.
Yeah, I was watching somebody play Odyssey, which is like or not Odyssey, Origins, which is like the one that took place in Egypt.
Yeah.
And it looks kind of like the developers of Assassin's Creed were like, Witcher 3 is really popular. Our game should be more like that.
Yeah, that's the thing.
You
If
know?
you watched it for like 20 seconds and then like that's all I showed you, and I was like, oh, it's an RPG. You'd be
Right,
like, oh,
yeah.
okay. But if I showed
Yeah.
you
You
like
copied right.
if I showed you like Need for Speed, I was like, oh, it's an RPG. You'd be like, really?
Yeah.
Like
No.
I didn't see it, you know? So it's one of those things where, yeah. Anyways, we're not going to tread over the same ground again. But I go lenient on people on Discord if they call it an RPG. It's okay.
I'll say this: if I want to talk about something I want to talk about, like say a new Devil May Cry comes out, I'm like, yeah, Devil May Cry is, of course, it's an RPG. All right, now let's talk about it.
I think when that last God of War game came out, I think I was talking to Eric. And I was like, well, I mean, it's got some like RPG stuff. And Eric was like, that's not an RPG. And I was like, okay, you're right. I was trying to find a way. I was like, well, maybe, you know, we can. No, we can't. All right. We got one last question here. Is there any video game you have replayed where you had a complete change of opinion after a second or multiple playthroughs, either for the better or worse?
Yes.
Go ahead, Eric.
It's actually very recent too. And first off, shout out to Mike at Resident Arc. He's him and Kason over there were the one who did this to me.
Oh, I already know what you're talking about.
They just did recently this major, and it's great watch. I mean, it's something you take in like one episode at a time, of course, because each one's like almost 2 to 3 hours. But they're all great. Listening to it, it made me want to go back to play Final Fantasy VIII again.
So you're talking about
And-
their Final Fantasy VIII discussion where they kind of go through the first couple of hours and kind of break it down like super finite detailed.
Yes.
Yeah.
And what is fascinating is I don't know why, but I never took the time to really look deep into FF8's lore and reasoning for like the characters and such. So as going through it again, seeing it from the different perspectives that I've been listening to lately, like I feel the game, there's still problems, of course. Like the junction system is still just like,
Yeah.
It's a rushed feature for sure.
Sure.
And the enemies leveling are not, it's still not a good there's
That's
a
a
lot of
bad idea.
gameplay.
Yeah.
Yeah. But there's aspects to the stories I never thought about. And there's like elements I thought I didn't like at first, but now I'm more either indifferent or actually liking these particular scenes now. Like like the whole like I still don't 100% buy the orphanage spoiler. That's very famous to people who played FF8. That's a very controversial one. People talk about a lot.
Sure.
But after reading it, there was actually certain elements that were hinted beforehand about this revelation here. Like there's propaganda at the beginning that there are people led to believe that GFs were making people lose their memories,
Right.
and people are being like, ah, it's just fake news. I didn't know Balam Garden
Very
was the
fake.
only I didn't know Balam Garden was the only one that used GFs. And I it's silly I don't see it now because Irvine was from Galbadia Garden and he joined the group, but his memory of his time at the orphanage was still intact while everyone else forgot.
Yeah.
So
Well, I mean, but
so
he can equip GF. So
yeah, he just started equipping GFs
oh,
in the group. Like
and then he has his memory.
I don't want to. I don't want to detract from your point, but
yeah.
keep going.
And then like the whole thing with Adia or who's matron and Kramer, Sid Kramer, like actually established like the garden beforehand to take on the sorceress who Squall came from the future
Oh
to
boy,
warn
okay.
Adia about.
Spoilers, guys.
Yeah, yeah, Final Fantasy has been out for a while, but
Sure.
I understand people haven't played it yet. So if you haven't, but I mean, there's no way you don't know what I'm talking about right now, unless you played the game. But there are elements that add up to make it make more sense. Like,
Sure.
I still think it's silly that they all happen to be at the same orphanage, but it doesn't seem like as like contrived or anything anymore. Like, I can understand it better now that I've actually read into like the wikis and such.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's also these cool little elements, like the whole reason that they reactivate the communication tower at the beginning to that whole Dalet mission, to bring
Okay.
TV broadcasting back after 17 years of, and the reason why there's interference to begin with is because of sorceress Adele, who's sealed away, who's I don't know if I'm getting this completely right, but that is sealing, that's blocking the transmission, and that's why they stopped doing radio transmission uh, in that world, because Adele is screwing around with it, and you actually see on the TV. Well, you can't see it in the standard definition, and it's actually hard to see in HD also. But when you are at a certain TV in Timber, when they get the TV comes on, and there's these text messages coming through, and it's like sorceress Adele talking to people from like, or like her will is talking to people, and that's really creepy. That
Yeah.
like you just see on the TV, like, gonna kill you all, LOL.
Yeah. There's a lot of interesting things that I watched those Resident Arc podcast episodes also. It was very good where they went into depth with Final Fantasy VIII, and there's a lot of little details that I appreciated as well. And there's little things that I actually didn't criticize at all, before, and it kind of pointed out like there was a prison break sequence, and they were talking about how unrealistic of a prison break sequence this would be, and like I never even crossed my mind to think of it like that. So
Mhm.
definitely, I agree with you. But that game is Final Fantasy VIII is one of those games that when you replay it, you kind of get something new out of it every time, and it wears you down a little bit. That first time you played it, especially if you're an adult, it can be a little difficult to get through because there's some uh it's difficult to grasp in one swoop. It's almost something like you have to play again or a third time to really fully appreciate everything that's there. So I think that's a good pick that you actually appreciated that game more so. I I can agree with that with Final Fantasy VIII. I kind of had
Mhm.
a similar experience, honestly, with Final Fantasy 15. Every time I play the game again, it tends
Hmm.
to be a little bit better than the last time, and so I've only played it through, I think, 3 times. And so the first time I did everything I could and I hated it. Second time I just went through and did the main story only, and it was much better. And then the third time I played it, I also played with the DLC that was available at the time and kind of played that where I felt like it should be. And, it was a better game then. So I think that's another one where it comes across my mind like, okay, I didn't really appreciate it first, but I'm starting to like it a little bit more. But I will say, a game that I did not love, the second playthrough, not a good idea for me. Secret of Mana. And the thing
Hmm.
is, we were originally talking about discussing this game on this podcast. This is a while ago. We're going to talk about it on the podcast. We've been talking about it on the podcast. And I was kind of talking like, oh, this is me playing Secret of Mana. We were thinking, okay, the remake's coming out soon. Maybe that would be a good time to play it. And I was playing the Super Nintendo version. And I like the music, I like the art style, but that is not a good game anymore. It's like when you go to the shop, you can't figure out if the item is better or not until you buy it, which is a terrible feature. The
Yeah.
rings menu system makes me want to beat my head through the wall. And then the like stun lock I constantly found where I'd be in a very narrow hallway and like an enemy would attack me and my character would just like perpetually be stunned until he dies.
Yep.
Happened like at some point it would just happen like every hour on the hour. And I was just like, dude, I can't believe I picked this game. And the thing is, I like really remember liking the game, and I didn't want to like spend 3 hours trashing the game on this podcast because people have a lot of nostalgic memories with the game. But that is a game where I replayed and it just did not gel with me as much. We ended up dropping it for Xenoblade, and that was probably a good idea.
I can agree with you. I've never been the biggest Secret of Mana fan. I like the game,
Right.
but I like it from the perspective of the era it came from. I think if I tried to recommend it to someone, I would have a hard time doing so because there's just a lot of elements that seem outdated. Like, I kind of wish it got the remake treatment that Trials of Mana did. Because I think if you modernized it to an extent, like they did with Trials of Mana, I think it would be a good game. It does have a good sense of exploration in the game, and it's fun to play with like other people,
That's
especially.
That's the key
Yes.
factor I think a lot of people talk about is they have fond memories of playing it with their friend, their spouse, or family members when they
Yep.
were younger, and that's like very much ingrained in their mind of them playing. It's similar to Final Fantasy Crystal Chronicles,
Yep.
But then when you replay the game later and you try to play it by yourself or not in that same dynamic, it has
It's
glaring
not.
issues.
Yeah, it's not as fun because you don't have the other person to either laugh at you or like laugh with you at the clunkiness of the game,
Right.
or help you overcome that like stupid stun lock situation where you're getting bashed against the wall and your partner can come and like hit the enemy away so you're no longer being trapped or whatever. But
Right.
that's not an excuse for it like to not have those problems, right? It's just that when you're playing with another person is a different dynamic, and then those things they still stand out as problems, but then you don't think about them as much, I think. Like when you're done with the experience, those don't stick in your mind as if, like you're saying, you're playing it by yourself and then those issues pop up more and it's just you in the game and you're like, why is it like this?
Here's a
Yeah.
hot take. I think Adventure of Mana, aka Final Fantasy Adventure on the Game Boy, has aged a lot better than Secret of Mana.
Hmm.
I don't know about that, but
That's
I
an interesting
haven't
opinion.
I
played
know
it, so-
about that.
Okay.
I'll even say that Sword of Mana is a underrated gem on the GBA. If you haven't played that, that's like Secret of Mana if they improved the mechanics. If you've never played that game before,
See, it's hard for me. Yeah. Maybe the Game Boy Advance game for sure, but on the Game Boy, and then I compare it to that SNES sound chip, like the music is so much better, and then and I know you know this, but and then obviously the artwork is so much better. So it's like I feel like that compensates so much in terms of my experience.
Better presentation, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know, man. I don't know. I would have to go back and replay. I think I bought the game. I bought the collection of Mana game because I felt like that was going to be a collector's item. Basically,
Mhm.
I had the physical version, so maybe I need to go back and play that first game again and see, do I actually like this, more so.
to go back on FF15
Sure.
that you mentioned before, I will say now that the game's been out for years now. Wow, it's been out for a couple of years.
Feels like it just came out. Yeah.
To reflect on it, I think I think why you like it so much is because you're kind of more accepting of what it is now.
Well, I don't like it.
Um,
Let's be clear.
yeah, I'm not saying you like it. I'm saying you accept what it is now. Now
More
that like
so.
everything's all said and done,
Right.
and then you, and this is my opinion too. I'm not putting words in your mouth, but you can kind of appreciate what they attempted to do in some things because there are redeemable qualities to FF15. But then when I play, if I ever play through again, the first thing I'm going to notice is like, why can't we go to Tenebrae or anything like that? Like, why can't these people just join our party? And it's like, why can't we explore the world of Ruin? Like, why are there clearly scenes that need to be cutscenes not shown?
Do I
It's
have
like,
to avenge Jared?
yes,
What if I don't want to?
it's like who is Jared again?
The
Like
subway
there are
guy.
these,
This is product
yeah,
placement.
yeah, because what they do right in the game is really good. Like I haven't played episode Arden, but I did see a little bit of it, and like that does help the game a lot in some way with establishing Arden. And I'm thinking to myself, this just should have just been at the in the game. Like this is a game that just needed to be in the oven much longer, which is
Yeah.
ironic to say because like the whole concept of the game was in production for since 2006. I was in high school when that was announced,
Yeah.
and
Versus
now
13, yeah.
now I'm a freaking 32-year-old that's gonna be a dad in a few months. It's like, God Lord.
Yeah. Yeah, I think part of it is just having time away from the game and then you come back to it. You understand more of its faults and like what maybe you've done research on the game like the FF8 podcast from Resonant Arc like you're mentioning like if you just play FF8 like well then there's things you like and things you don't like, right? Like there's just things that bother you. But then you guys still there?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh,
Being-
okay. I cut out for a second. But yeah, there's things that bother you or don't bother you, but it's just you in the game. But then something like Resident Arc's 8 kind of retrospective podcast, you become more informed. Like the things you like, someone can explain to you like why it's good, right? Like why it was well done, and then you can go back and appreciate it even more. Or they can tell you like this prison escape sequence, like here's why it didn't work, you know, or these other plot elements. Here's why they aren't quite as strong as they could be. Here's why some people can't relate to Squall, or here's why some people don't buy the relationship between him and Renoa, right? And then you can say, oh, like that's why it bothered me, or that's why it didn't bother me, and that's why I got it. And so you can have like a new appreciation for kind of the challenges and the choices like the developers made, so that you're thinking more about like how the game was created, or I guess, or like the context surrounding the game, rather than just the game annoying you or enjoying it. Either way,
Yeah, if you hear somebody talk about it in a different way, I think that the way my mind works though, when I hear people analyzing stuff, my mind immediately wants to find, is there any holes with this, right? So a lot of times I'll just when I listen to stuff, I'll be analyzing it. I'll be like, well,
they might not be right about that, or
right.
there could be some other reason.
Let me see if I
Yeah.
disagree, But yeah, I see where you're coming from. That that's one way to revisit a game and try to appreciate it in a new light is when you hear people talk about it and kind of give their impression of it. What gets me though is when you appreciated a game from your memory, right? And then you hear people talk about the game and you talk and they're talking about it in a very negative light, right?
Mhm.
And there's a lot of group consensus around the fact that this game is not good and you have not played it in a very long time. And they're bringing up all these specific examples and you're like, no, that's not true, and you're almost in denial, right? And I'm like,
Oh, yeah.
a game that's coming to mind is The Bouncer on the Super Nintendo, on the PlayStation 2. You know, when I was
Yeah.
a kid, because I think that was one of the early PS2 games I had, and I think the fact that the graphics were so great to me at the
Mhm.
time, where I was just, and I had voice acting and just like lots of great presentation compared to what I remembered. I remembered that game being good, you know? And then later as an adult, I see all these discussions popping up on how terrible that game was. And I remember thinking, like, these people are all wrong. They're full of crap,
Yeah.
you know? And then you go revisit it and you're just like, this game sucks. You know,
Yeah.
it's not good. They're right, you know? And
Yeah.
it's kind of an interesting experience when you hear people talk about it and it actually convinces you the opposite, that the game is actually, you thought it was good and then it's actually not good at all, you know?
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh wait, by the way, Stan, what was your game?
Oh, I didn't get to that yet. Yeah, that's right. So for me, I was thinking about this. A game that I initially had a negative opinion of, and then it became more positive over time, is actually, and Eric's gonna hate me for this because it's a Zelda game, Wind Waker on the GameCube. So I really, really enjoyed.
Button on this damn thing.
I'm getting banned from the Discord for this. Yeah. Yeah.
We're now,
but,
we're now looking for a new
Wind
third
Waker on the
member.
GameCube. Yeah, I really, really liked Ocarina of Time. I had an N64 as like one of my first consoles I ever got, and I just loved that game, and I played it to death. And then also played Majora's Mask a lot, and I love that game as well. And then Zelda, like the aesthetic, is what turned me off to the game. The not so much the cell shading, but just the very like cartoonish aesthetic and proportions of the characters.
You are a non-believer.
Yes. So I almost just from seeing the game in the magazines, right, in the gaming magazines, which used to be a thing, is no longer a thing. But I was like, ooh, like, no, like, what have they done to Zelda, right? So it was almost kind of like I wasn't giving it a chance, like, before I even played it, right? But then somebody I knew had a GameCube. I didn't have one, but then I went over to his house to play it, and still I didn't like it. Like, I didn't like seeing it in motion either. But then, like, as I've gotten older and I revisited it a while ago, probably several years ago at this point, though, I came to appreciate it more because of it's frankly aged better than all those other Zelda games. Like, it still looks good today because of the art style that they chose. Now, it's still not my favorite, but my opinion of it has improved. One, because it aged well, and two, because I'm not just an edgy teenager obsessed with graphics anymore. Like, there's more to gaming than that. So because I really
so
like
you've
kind
come
of like
around on it then. You didn't like it initially, but now you do.
yeah, like, so I didn't
So you can stay on the
Like-
podcast then.
I hope so, yeah.
Okay, keep going.
Yeah,
You'll
like,
get reprimanded for a week though.
Yeah, I like, there was the Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask already like had like a darker aesthetic to them, and kind of like a darker feel. And then Wind Waker is just like flipped, like very bright, very colorful. The characters are like kind of more cartoonish proportions and have like very expressive kind of motions to them, and it's just different. It's like all of a sudden they turned Zelda into a cartoon, whereas before I didn't see it as.
Yeah, I told you I was going to ban them.
Yeah, that already happened. See,
I'm so good I can do it with my mind.
so anyways,
Um,
okay,
okay,
Stan,
he's
are you back?
I'm back. What?
Okay,
What did I,
Well,
So the
Eric,
ban
just
didn't
like I
work.
said, yeah. It's kind of funny.
banning
'cause
me already?
You stopped at like the perfect moment. And we are like, well, all right. So
Okay.
you were go ahead and just kind of summarize what you were saying again. You were basically describing the way it looked and like the reasons why you've come around now that you're older and like your new sensibilities and that type of thing.
Yeah. I don't put so much priority on graphics anymore. Essentially, like the game stayed the same and I changed. That's really the what it comes down to. It's still not my favorite, partly due to the aesthetic. I think it is a little too cartoonish, certain aspects of it for me, but it did have the advantages of like being more expressive. Like the characters can be far more expressive than anything they did on the N64.
Were you kind of also did you see that GameCube showcase of what Zelda could be on the GameCube before the Wind Waker demo?
It's
Because I have
very
a feeling that
possible.
would probably be a contributing factor also.
It's very possible. Yeah.
Yeah,
And then
because
and
I
then I
remember
remember
seeing that.
yeah, and then I remember seeing how they revealed the next one, Twilight Princess, I believe, right on the Wii.
GameCube and Wii. Yeah.
Yeah, GameCube and Wii, and the aesthetic was more in line with Ocarina of Time, and I was like, yeah, finally, yeah, like Zelda's going back to, yeah, this is what we should have got all along. But now
Twilight
I'm older.
Princess. Oh no, go ahead.
Well, now I'm older, and I think Wind Waker looks way better than Twilight Princess, in my opinion. Like it's aged way better.
Do you like the way that? I'm sorry, Eric. Go ahead.
What I'm about to say is the interesting thing is the reason Twilight Princess aesthetics were the way they were actually a direct response to the disappointment of Wind Waker.
Yeah.
Because even though Wind Waker was a fantastic game when it came out and people loved it, and it got good ratings, everything like that, and there was a lot of people who changed their minds around the time. But the fact of the matter was, the aesthetic actually, it's one of the lowest. It still sold well, but it's one of the lowest selling 3D Zelda games.
Yeah.
For it, and Nintendo saw that and they're like, okay, well, we need to go back to what people want. So when Twilight Princess got announced, there's a YouTube video of it. You should watch it if you haven't seen it. When they first announced Twilight Princess, people
freaking out.
lost their mind. I know, because I was one of them.
Yeah.
And
so
seeing it was
there was a
amazing.
bunch of there was a bunch of edgy teenagers like me who didn't like Wind Waker and for the aesthetic basically, and didn't buy what is an excellent game because of it. And then they had to course correct, right, and go back to the older art style and try and improve on that.
Now they did a good meet in the middle nowadays. Like Skyward Sword has like the aesthetic that people like from Twilight Princess, but still like and Breath of the Wild especially. But it still has like the cell shading that allows you to get that beautiful colored aesthetic that makes it look unique. Like for Skyward Sword, like they were influenced by French paintings when like creating like the aesthetics for that game. And that's something you probably wouldn't be able to do as much like with Twilight Princess, but with like the canvas like look and feel Skyward Sword, they were able to accomplish that with using Wind Waker like cell shading, but still retaining the Ocarina of Time like characters that people like. But Toon Link still lives on. The Wind Waker look still lives on in handheld games. So it didn't go anywhere. It just went into a place probably a little more appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
It's interesting that you're bringing all this up, Stan, because I'm remembering I kind of felt similar feelings with Final Fantasy 12. When I first saw that announced, I was one of the people that thought this was a line that went too far. I was upset that Final Fantasy 11 was online, and then Final Fantasy 12 came out, and they got rid of turn-based combat.
Yeah.
And I thought this was just too far. This was just too far. And it like the art aesthetic, it seemed to me like, what is this? Like, I don't, why are they going in this new direction? I don't like this at all. And so I waited like 4 or 5 years to pick it up. And then I finally did at the end of the PlayStation 2 life cycle, or maybe even after the PS3 came out, but I didn't have one. And I picked it up for like $15, $20, and I loved it. I thought it was, I thought it was fantastic. I was like, this game's great. It's like, what was I doing? I was kind of disappointed that, I didn't get it, but I don't know if I would have appreciated it if I had picked it up on day one, because of the things that I brought up. Whereas by the time I picked it up, I was kind of I'd grown a little bit and realized that it can still be good and not be completely turn-based, you know? So,
It was a little
Yeah.
odd to me at first too, because I was like, wait, this is not what I usually expect from Final Fantasy. But then like someone told me it's like it's set in Evil East, what like the Final Fantasy Tactics game like you obsess over. And I was like, oh. I was like, wait a second. Now I'm definitely more open to it because it definitely has more Western, like, well, Final Fantasy always has a level of Western inspiration, but like Final Fantasy 12 with Evil East, like definitely, dials it over to the Western side a lot more. So I could see how that may have been unappealing to people who uh like the more style of like Final Fantasy 8 and 10
mhm.
and or like even 9 and traditional Final Fantasies for that matter.
Yeah,
But it still ended up being really good in its own way. But it is definitely a more different Final Fantasy than
a
ones
departure
before.
for sure.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm kind of interested, Stan, if since you're bringing up this art aesthetic with, you were bringing up with Wind Waker and how over time you kind of developed a greater appreciation. It's still not your favorite, but you know, what are you in the camp of you like Final Fantasy 16's art style, or do you think like this? And if you don't, or you do, what do you think would be your feelings maybe 10 years ago if you had saw, aside from looking really good?
Hmm.
Do you
Well,
see where I'm going
16
with that?
kind of 16's art style, from what I've seen of it, reminds me of a Evil East style art style, and I think that's because it's the same guy. It's
Mhm.
I can't think of the artist name currently, Minigawa or the other one.
So does it remind you of an Evil East art style because of Final Fantasy 12, or does it remind you because of Final Fantasy Tactics and Vagrant Story? Because to me, it's more Final Fantasy 12, right?
12,
So
yeah,
do you
12.
think you would have
Although well,
appreciated it, that art style, if you had saw it in 2002? Obviously, it would look amazing in 2002, but
yeah, I think I would. I don't remember being like turned off by Final Fantasy 12's art style in 2006. Like I thought it looked good.
yeah,
So
because it's just with me, when I saw that, I kind of liked it. I thought I thought it looked good, you know. But I was when you were
yeah.
kind of describing your experience, I was thinking like, honestly, if I saw this when I was younger, I probably would have had a similar reaction like I did to
Mm.
Final Fantasy 12, where this is repulsive. What is this?
I
you know?
probably would have
What are they
been
doing? Yeah.
cautiously optimistic, similar to when 12 first got announced,
Yeah.
because you're at the time you were so accustomed to these mystical like adventures that you go in Final Fantasy with like these unique art styles and type of clothing and worlds that you explore
Right.
are like really out there,
Hmm.
and like over the top on the fantasy. And then you get like Final Fantasy 12, which was like a more grounded, like it was still fantasy, of course, and there's a lot of fantasy in 12.
Hmm.
But when looking at it at a surface level, it does come off as more grounded and Western than previous Final Fantasy. So there was a reason to be like initially like cautious about it. And I feel like I probably would have been the same way with 16 if that came in around that time, because
Mhm.
it's got that same type of deal as 12 where it's like more Matsuno inspired, with its world and characters and everything. So it probably would have been the same boat. But nowadays, we're kind of expected to just like, who knows what they're going to do with the next Final Fantasy at this point. So we're not really that surprised anymore when they either take us to the future, take us to the past, take us to a Matsuno style game. It's like,
Hey, I was pretty surprised when they showed a medieval setting because I wanted them to go that route, but then I just fully expected them to just keep on with the futuristic stuff like they've been doing forever. So I was very surprised about that. And then that scene in the launch trailer where you got blood that flies over Jacob's face, I think it was
yeah.
Joshua, not Jacob. Joshua's face, where it's just like like all over his face. I was just like, oh my God, like this is different.
You
You
could
know?
turn it. You could take it right back down the tier rating if you just say, "Oh, I'm so sorry for getting that strawberry jam all over you, Joshua." Oh, it's okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Your dad's still dead, but sorry about the strawberry jam.
He's KO'd.
Oh, right.
Unconscious. Yeah.
And that's why we're burying him alive. Fish. Anyways, so yeah, I mean it's always interesting when you revisit games, play them, see how your tastes in games change, and what you used to find repulsive back in the day over time changes, and you learn to appreciate it more, whether it's because you're listening to a podcast, or you're just replaying the game and for the first time and being absorbed in it and living in it and learning what that game's trying to tell you, if anything, in a different way. It's a weird trip because I get stuff out of Final Fantasy IX that I never got when I was a kid. As an
Hmm.
adult, I feel like there's little things there that you can kind of pick up on that wouldn't really resonate with a kid. So it's definitely a wild trip to go back and play some of these games. So
definitely.
For sure.
But did you guys have anything else you want to bring up? I brought up at the top of this podcast, my Apple 4K is on the way,
Nice.
and I'm going to be playing some Fantasian.
I'm
Hopefully
playing Fantasian right now.
Hopefully it's Eric. Don't tell me if it's not any good or not. I don't know. Maybe it's great, but I'm going into it and I'm fully expecting it to be like the next great Final Fantasy game.
I'll
Like
just say
it's
this:
gonna like top all of them. That's why I'm going in.
no story spoiler here. It's gameplay related.
I saw there's random encounters.
Rather, if you're playing, but if you're playing on the phone, I guess you can just deal with the touch features. But if you're playing like on a tablet or something like that, I would probably recommend getting a Bluetooth controller if you have one laying around. The game doesn't have a virtual joypad when it really calls for one. So if you're playing on the touchscreen, it asks you to tap fingers where you want the character to walk to. And it's fine in theory, but in execution, it's really clunky and cumbersome, especially when you screen transition seamlessly. It's like hard to get your character over, and it's hard to tap your character near an NPC to talk to them with it. So, but I've heard that things are perfectly okay with a controller, though. So if you have a Bluetooth controller and you have access to playing this game, I would probably try that. But of course, the touch features are there. Try it first, see if you like it. If you don't, see what you can do to find a controller.
Yep. Nobuo Uematsu's last game.
Full
most likely.
soundtrack, right?
Full soundtrack.
Yeah.
Sakaguchi's kind of talking about, I don't know if I'll do another game. That might just be marketing talk, but I'm buying into it. It's a full-fledged RPG. It's the first half of one anyways, so I'm really excited. So I'm going to be playing that and some Bravely Default 2 when I have some time. Continue plowing through that. So we'll try to get an episode out in the future to kind of give our thoughts on Bravely Default 2, Fantasian, and I'm sure we'll have some other stuff to talk about in addition to that, because I think Monster Hunter Rise just came out, and we have some other games coming out as well. So lots of stuff to talk about.
Yep. Real quick, yeah, I'm also playing Bravely Default 2. I'm pretty far into it, so we can discuss that in a later episode. But also we want to give a shout out to RPGFan.com, right? Our media partner.
Yeah.
One-stop shop for all your RPG news since the late 90s, right? What was it, 99? 97?
Yeah, I think 98, 99, something like that. A long ass time.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're the experts. They've been at this a lot longer than we have. So if you need more RPG content, you can go over there, rpgfan.com. They have 3 podcasts now, right? It's the Random Encounter, Retro Encounter, and Rhythm Encounter.
Yeah. Yeah.
They cover various different games and topics. Yeah. All RPG related.
Yep. So go check them out. YouTube page. They're starting to push that some more. So RPG fan, just go put in YouTube. It'll come up and you'll see video versions of some of the reviews. They don't do all of the reviews because honestly, they do a lot. They'll even hit like a lot of the like indie stuff and things like that, in addition to the big releases as well. So anyways, lots of cool stuff to check out. So thank you for reminding me. RPGfan.com. Check out our media partner.
Mhm.
But I think that covers us for this episode. So like I said, I've got some stuff going on with work. I apologize. I'm getting through it. But in the near future, I'm nearing the end here. We're going to be back swinging and going in our normal schedule. But so appreciate your patience and understanding with us until that time. But we're almost there. You guys have gotten over the hump, so we'll be back normal soon. Anyways, thank you again, and we will talk to you all later. See ya.
All right. Take care.
See you next time.